In the ground under modern Iraq, archaeologists kept finding the same picture. A tree, always a tree. Tall winged figures on each side, reaching toward it, a strange object in hand. On palace walls, on clay tablets older than the Book of Genesis, they named it the sacred tree and moved on. Then a line was translated that did not fit the name. It did not describe a plant being worshipped. It described a thing being operated. And what it produced is the reason you have never heard this. Start with what everyone gets wrong, the tree of life. You picture Eden, a garden, Adam, Eve, a serpent, a single forbidden tree at the center of the world. That picture comes from the Book of Genesis, and Genesis is the version most of the world ended up with. It is not the original, it is the copy. The tree was already ancient when Genesis was written. It stood in the art of Sumer and Assyria and Babylon hundreds of years earlier, in some cases more than 1,000. Same shape, same meaning, same position right at the center, the most important object in the room. The peoples of ancient Mesopotamia did not take the tree of life from the Bible. The Bible arrived late to a symbol that was already old. And here is the part the museums state plainly, then walk straight past. We do not fully know what the tree was supposed to be. We know it mattered more than almost anything they carved. We know kings spent fortunes putting it on their walls. We know they surrounded it with guardians. What we do not have is a clean answer for what it stood for. The plaque on the wall says sacred tree. The honest footnote underneath says, meaning uncertain. It was the 1840s, and a British digger named Austin Henry Layard was digging into a mound in northern Iraq, on the bank of the Tigris. Under the dirt, he found a palace, not the rubble of one. A palace with its walls still standing, lined with carved stone slabs taller than a man. The king who built it was Ashur-nasirpal II. He ruled the Assyrian Empire about 900 years before Christ. His palace stood at a city the Assyrians called Apkallu, at a place we now call Nimrud. And on panel after panel, the same scene repeated. A tree, drawn in a set way, even on both sides, almost like a chart, and on either side of it, a tall winged figure, human-bodied, sometimes eagle-headed, always reaching toward the tree. The Assyrians had a word for these figures, Apkallu. It means sage. In their own writing, the Apkallu were not just for show. They were beings of knowledge, sent to people in the deep past to hand down a whole way of living. The crafts, the laws, the arts, everything that made a person more than an animal. The Apkallu brought it down and gave it over. Now look at what the Apkallu holds. In one hand, a small bucket. In the other, an object shaped like a pine cone, raised toward the tree. Every museum that owns one of these panels describes the move the same careful way. The figure is cleaning the tree, pollinating it, tending it. Tending it. Hold that word for a second. Because you do not tend a symbol, you tend a thing that is alive, or a thing that is running. The panels sit in the British Museum, the Met in New York, Yale, Brooklyn, Princeton. You can stand in front of one today. A winged figure, frozen mid-motion, feeding something into a tree with a device in its hand. For almost 200 years, the official reading has not changed. Ritual, worship, symbol. But nobody operates a symbol. There is one more detail carved into those same walls, and the record keeper in me cannot let it pass. Running straight across the middle of nearly every panel, cutting right through the tree and the winged figures, is a band of carved writing. Experts call it the standard inscription. It is the same block of text, repeated on carving after carving, listing the king's titles, his family line, the lands he took, the sacred scene, and the official record of the state share the same stone. Whatever the tree was, the Assyrians filed it next to the business of running an empire. And the object in the Apkallu's hand has a second reading that the experts themselves put forward. The Assyrians were master farmers of the date palm, and the date palm does not pollinate on its own. A worker has to carry the male flower to the female tree by hand, or there is no harvest. Some experts look at that cone and see exactly that. A tool for making a tree produce, which only sharpens the question. Whether you read it as worship or as work, the scene shows the same thing. Skilled figures doing a set of steps to make the central tree give something back. This is where the story takes a turn the textbooks keep in a separate chapter. Because the carved tree on the wall is not the only tree of life that Mesopotamia left behind. There is also a written one. It lives inside the oldest long story people have. The Epic of Gilgamesh, pressed into clay more than 1,000 years before Genesis, pulled in pieces from the same buried libraries. Near the end, the hero, Gilgamesh, has lost the one person he loved, and he is terrified of his own end. He goes looking for a way out. He finds a man who lived through the Great Flood, a man the gods let live forever, and that man tells him a secret. There is a plant. It grows at the bottom of the freshwater deep. In the waters the Mesopotamians called the Apsu. The Apsu was not just water. It was the home of Enki, the god of fresh water, craft, and a sharp mind, the same god who, in their own telling, made the sages and sent them up to teach mankind. The plant that beats the end and the source of all knowledge come from the same place. Whoever holds the plant does not have to grow old and fade away. So Gilgamesh ties stones to his feet, the way a diver weights himself, sinks to the bottom, and takes it. The plant has a name in the original language. Translated, it reads, "The old man becomes young." That is not a poem, that is a job. You put it in, and the result that comes out is youth. He does not eat it on the spot. He saves it. He plans to test it on an old man back home first, before he risks it on himself. Careful. Almost like a man running a trial. And then he stops to bathe. He sets the plant down on the ground. A snake smells it, slides up, and takes it. As the snake leaves, it sheds its skin and crawls away new. That is why, in the oldest story we have, snakes seem to cheat the end and people do not. A plant that resets the body. A snake by the water, stealing the gift of life. Hundreds of years before Eden was ever written, the pieces were already on the table. A tree, a serpent, a fruit that makes you live forever. If Gilgamesh had eaten the plant the moment he came up, this would be a very different story. The honest question is not why the Bible has these images. It is why Sumer had them first. If a buried palace and a 4,000-year-old plant that winds the body backward has your attention, subscribe. This channel reads the record, the translators tucked into footnotes, and the museums named and walked past. There is far more of it than anyone tells you. By the time the Gilgamesh tablets were being pieced together in the 1870s in a back room of the British Museum, the man doing the work understood the Assyrian language better than almost anyone alive. His name was George Smith. He had taught it to himself. In one famous afternoon, he read a line about a flood, and a man, and a boat, and realized he was holding a version of the Noah story older than the Book of Noah. He was so shaken that, as the story goes, he started taking off his clothes in the room. Smith and the men around him translated a mountain of clay, and in that mountain, the tree comes up again. Not as a picture this time, as a description. This has to be said plainly, because it is the whole reason this video exists, and not 100 others. There is no single tablet where an ancient scribe writes, "The tree of life was a machine." That exact sentence does not exist. What exists is stranger, because it is scattered across the record in pieces. The Mesopotamians described the sacred tree and the things tied to it, using language that does not sound like the language of worship. The plant in Gilgamesh is not praised, it is used, weighted, brought back up, named for what it makes, saved for a test. The Apkallu at the tree are not bowing. They are working, hands full of gear, doing the same set of steps on the same spot over and over. And the thing the Apkallu themselves are said to have brought down to people is not faith. It is technology, skills, methods, the knowledge that turns mud villages into cities. Lay those three facts next to each other, and a different reading appears. Not a tree that is holy, a tree that does something. A central object, guarded, kept running by skilled figures with tools that takes something in and gives back a result the ancients valued above gold. Life stretched out, knowledge handed down. A job, done over and over. In that reading, the cone and the bucket are not incense holders. They are the controls. The winged sages are not priests. They are operators, the way a people with no word for operator would draw one. And the tree is not the subject of a prayer at all. Everything else in that scene exists to keep it running. Nobody carved the word machine. They had no such word. So they drew the closest thing they could. A perfect, even tree, attended forever by beings holding tools, producing the one thing every king in history actually wanted. So what did it produce? Read the record on its own terms, and the same answer keeps rising up from three directions at once. From the Apkallu, it produced knowledge, a whole way of life delivered at once, from somewhere above, by figures who showed up already, knowing everything a person would need to build a world. And we are not guessing about that knowledge. 300 years before Christ, a Babylonian priest named Berossus sat down to explain his own people to the Greek world, and he told them where it all came from. He said that, at the very start, before history, a being rose out of the Persian Gulf. Its body was a fish, but it had a human head and human feet, and it spoke. The Babylonians called it Oannes. By day, it walked among them and taught them writing, math, farming, law, how to build cities and raise temples. Nothing they had, Berossus says, had they owned before it came. At night, it went back into the water, and after it, 6 more of the same kind of being followed, until everything a people needs was already finished, before the flood ever came. Oannes was one of the Apkallu, the first of the 7. The fish-bodied sage out of the deep, the same kind of being that Assyrian artists later carved with wings, standing beside the tree, holding the tool. The beings who delivered the knowledge are standing right next to the source that produced it. From the plant in Gilgamesh, it produced life, not life forever, something more exact than that, age running backward. The old man becomes young, a body wound backward like a clock. And from the tree itself, the one on every palace wall, it produced what lasts. The reason a king covered his throne room in it, not because it was pretty, because it stood for the thing that does not run out, the source that keeps giving. Steady times, good harvests, the royal line, his rule, all of it flowing out of one cared-for point. Knowledge, life, what lasts. Put them together, and you are not looking at 3 different symbols. You are looking at 3 results from one machine. A source that hands down wisdom, brings the body back, and never stops. That is what the original tree of life was. In the reading the footnotes will not print, not a plant in a garden. A source. And the winged figures spend forever making sure it keeps producing. This is the part where a careful viewer pushes back, and they should. None of this proves a real machine sat in ancient Iraq. The point is smaller and harder to wave away. The people who made these images did not treat the tree like a make-believe sign. They treated it like something valuable. They drew it being worked on. And when a people draws the most sacred thing in their world as a thing that gets kept up, that tells you how they understood it. Not as a story, as something real enough to keep running. Which leaves one question. If the record reads this way on its own terms, why is sacred tree the answer on the wall? Part of it is honest care. Experts translate what they can back up. An operated device is not a phrase you can back up from a cracked tablet. So they reach for the safe word. Symbol, ritual, sacred. Each one true. Each one smaller than what is sitting in front of them. But care has a side effect. Translate the same scene as worship 1,000 times, and the worship reading quietly becomes the fact, and the stranger reading never gets printed at all. The footnote that says, meaning uncertain, stops being read. The public gets the clean version. A tree, a symbol, a nice story about an old people who liked gardens. Then a second pattern showed up, and it made the first one worse. The same tree, the same guardians on each side, the same pose, turns up far beyond Assyria, in Egypt, in the art of ancient Iran. Carried east and west until you find versions of it across the ancient world, in cultures separated by deserts, mountains, and hundreds of years. One central source, 2 helpers. A guarded thing that gives life. The same picture, everywhere. Either every one of these peoples made the exact same picture by accident, or they were all copying something they remembered, something real enough to record, and too important to let go of. And the version that finally reached us, the garden, the apple, the lesson about doing as you're told, is the last and the softest retelling of a memory that started as a record. Sit with what that means for a second. If the garden in Genesis is a retelling, then the snake, the tree, and the promise of life were never invented by the story we were raised on. They were handed down, worn smooth by the time they reached us. In Genesis, the way back to the tree of life is blocked by guardians with a flaming sword. That image has a much older twin. A pair of winged figures, posted on either side of the same tree, in the same guarding pose, carved in stone 1,000 years before the angel was ever written down. Go back to where this started. A British digger in the dirt of Iraq finding the same picture again and again. A tree he could not explain, tended by winged figures he could not explain, holding tools he could not explain. He gave it a name that made it easy to handle: Sacred Tree. And the name held for almost 200 years. The clay underneath that name says something the name was built to cover: that the oldest people we can read drew their most important object not as a god to be worshipped, but as a source to be operated. That they remembered something arriving from above and handing down life and knowledge. That they kept the memory in stone and in clay, in 1,000 copies, because they did not want it lost. It was not lost. It was renamed. A machine became a symbol. A source became a garden. And what it produced, the life, the knowledge, the thing every ruler in history has chased, got filed into a footnote in a museum, under 2 safe words, where almost no one would ever go looking. Someone decided that footnote was where the answer should stay. If you want the next piece, the Apkallu themselves, the 7 sages the Assyrians said came up out of the water before the flood and taught mankind everything it knows, that record is stranger than the tree, and the video is on the screen right now. Hit subscribe so the next tablet comes to you. The record is still down there. We are still reading it.